Hey guys, Breastfacts here. I was recently discussing some preparedness theories on my Discord, as I tend to do while avoiding any actual work. A theme I somewhat picked on in the last couple of months is a tendency for conversations to kind of forget that between rule of law and literal Mad Max, there's actually a lot in between. If you're curious, the discussion went to multi-year long water purification and resupply, for something that essentially amounted to civil unrest. Another scenario listed was full-blown patrol bases near platoon-sized elements, recon, all to secure a section of river and go fishing to secure calories. During a Katrina-style event. The same way a box of Dasani water is more relevant than an $800 tactical pump and ceramic filter for short-duration civil unrest scenarios, so too does a box of Mountain House from Costco end up being more practical, safer, and efficient than turning your local river into an inverse Cornwall Valley, just to hold a riverbank to get some fishies. While there is a time and a place for these things, trust me, I'm all about that. It represents an issue that I think the preparedness community kind of grapples with. If all of your preparedness effort is going into designing and mimicking military-style engagements, SOPs, and others, you're going to begin employing these practices when perhaps a much simpler solution exists. Or worse yet, you might actually lack the relevant preparedness item as you've spent all your time and effort for that 1% scenario. So I've created a sort of shit-hit-the-fan food pyramid of sorts as a visual talking aid for this and a video I want to do after discussing and perhaps recontextualizing a lot of these issues. The general idea behind the, real food pyramid is to manage your relative portion size with carbs and veggies making the bulk of your consumption. Then we have dairy, then meat, and then finally like dessert-type foods. More or less, it basically boils down to what your mom kept telling you: eat your fucking greens and stop eating so much candy. Except in this video, we'll be using it as an aid, and instead I'll be saying, have more than just beer for water in your house and stop buying so much tactical shit. Last week I talked about the taps incidentally and the issues I had with it and how you can buy other systems to sort of modernize the concept. This week, for the sponsored section, the guys over at Venture Surplus have created a single buy link for their favorite configuration of the rig, honestly solving many of the problems I had with it, last week. This includes 2 HSGI speed reload pouches, 2 Eagle Industries GP/canteen pouches, which, by the way, are actually low-key the best part. I'm going to be buying more of those pouches, a bungee replacement kit, and a center GP USMC assault pouch. Venture has their own YouTube channel where they explain exactly how to set this up, how to get the most out of the individual pieces of gear, and most importantly, how to replace a chest harness with an aftermarket one, because the stock one is kind of mediocre. The one you see in the video here is a unobtainium gear one, which is about 35 bucks. This whole rig can hold 8 or 12 mags, a huge front GP, 2 side GPs, room for first aid, radio, match pouch, and more. All of this, because it was built with surplus gear, because Venture Surplus, can be acquired for about 143 bucks, or 83 for the pouches only. Combined with my discount code down below, this is about the most capability you can get for the asking price. Cool. Enough said. Back to the video.
Buc-ee's!
Buc-ee's! I don't know what's got better branding, Buc-ee's or Texas.
Buc-ee's isn't even that great.
The system.
Watch your mouth!
Sucks, dude. All you Texans can fucking come at me.
Dude, Busy Bee is where it's at, bro. Busy Bee.
Is the Floridian talking?
Busy Bee.
What the fuck is that?
So let's go through it, right? At the bottom we have rule of law, nominal times, basically right now, I think. No, knock on wood. This is distinctly unsexy, but represents one of the biggest shortcomings of the preparedness community: managing and preparing your day-to-day life. Part of being an adult is being ready for the mundane, but similarly as dangerous year-to-year emergencies. These aren't just man versus nature like spare tire, first aid, being stranded, fire extinguisher, but also kind of man versus society. Going bankrupt, getting curb stomped by an unexpected medical bill, getting laid off during a recession, all somewhat likely, and compared to a shit-hit-the-fan scenario, are basically a certainty. Even if you're convinced that the US is going to implode at some point in the future, nothing is going to hurt your preps more than if you go bankrupt 5 years from now and need to sell all of your preps and rifles to put food on the table right here, right now. I'm not going to dive into too much detail regarding this today. I have a whole video on the matter. Consider this your fundamental building block for your entire preparedness plan, and a solid foundation in life matters a lot more than upgrading your weapon light to a slightly better weapon light or min-maxing your home defense rifle to make soft troops envious. Now the video kind of gets interesting. We get into local disruption. Disruption is defined as a disturbance or sometimes even a temporary halt to all or some of the building blocks of a functional society, but by definition is reversible. such that local municipalities can likely handle it within existing infrastructures and SOPs, and if not, can request assistance at the regional level where services are unaffected. We can see this manifest as, say, multi-day power outage, minor environmental issues like local flooding, unexpected amounts of snow crippling local services temporarily, or that random time where we had so much wind in Utah all the semi-trucks kept tipping over and nothing could go anywhere outside of the city, and no one can go anywhere for about 6 hours. I mean, actually, that's not technically in this category. I just wanted to mention it because I thought it was kind of cool. And yes, this includes the fan-favorite civil unrest, where local police and services are temporarily overwhelmed by a massive uptick in loss of rule of law. From a supplies and preparedness perspective, a single grocery store trip is all you really need to get you through this, but that's the key, right? You want to make that grocery trip and to build those skills and experiences before these events occur, be it handgun skills, be it the water in your house, be it supplies, be it egress scenarios, whatever. You want to do that all beforehand, because if you try to do it in the moment, some of it is simply undoable, some of it means getting stuck at a grocery store like everyone else, and buying, I don't know, toilet paper was what happened last time. And that really feels like the big gotcha for preparing for this. If you can't, right now, honestly shut your door, power off all your utilities, and not lose 100 pounds because you're forced to go into fasting 4 minutes in, or straight up dying because you only have beers, water in your house, then perhaps you need to go back to the drawing board, back to the pyramid, and you might realize you're eating a little too much of that red meat, and a little too much sugar, and a little too much of that $2,000 laser aiming module. And perhaps considering bulking up the base of your pyramid here, and having a much more concrete, realistic plan.
Quietest I've ever seen. If that's not zeroed by tonight, then something's wrong with my gun, laser optic, or...
What?
I said I fucked your mother!
Oh, was it good?
No!
Damn.
It was on me though, it was my fault.
Small peepee.
Yeah.
As we move down, or, well, in this case it's up the pyramid, sometimes we get a more enhanced version of this local disruption. That's the regional disruption. For the US, I think a good chunk of us can perhaps remember Katrina, which is a good example of a regional disruption, a Cat 5 hurricane. Now, relatively speaking, Cat 5 hurricanes aren't all that rare. In fact, they hit almost yearly. But due to several factors with Katrina, it hit a large enough area with enough intensity, combined with some other critical infrastructure failures, that not just local municipalities were overwhelmed, but regional entities were hit as well. Instead of the wider area being able to converge on a relatively small zone, in the short term, we found a very large area where everyone kind of had to fend for themselves. Even after help began to arrive due to the scale, it would take sometimes months for normalcy to be returned to certain areas deep in the hot zone. For a preparedness strategy, while not significantly different than a local disturbance, any preps here need to last longer and be far more robust. For example, while you can kind of suck it up in the short term, you're probably going to want a cook system. And can that cook system continue to function in terms of fuel for 1 hot meal a day, 2 hot meals a day, for weeks, months, shit, half a year? What about personal hygiene? That's not so important during a week-long event, but what about a multi-month-long event? That can cause infection. What is your game plan for taking a big ol' shit twice a day? That's a lot of poop and it's got to go somewhere unless it causes issues. How about power, both for your big-ticket high-voltage items, but mundane stuff as well? Do you have a cell tower agnostic communication plan? And of course, are you ready to handle not just the spontaneous, but planned, organized violence against you? We've heard countless anecdotes of raiders in Katrina, and even in some short-term events that recently occurred, had one of my Discord members mention that a bunch of, quote, sketchy armed people were sneaking up to what they thought was an abandoned house. Too bad for them, they were running rotating firewatch and had night vision, and a brisk, hey, I'd be leaving if I were you, prevented a situation from, escalating to a much worse situation. I'll be quick to point out that in most of these cases, dudes are just looking for free shit. But it's not too hard to imagine a slightly more prolonged scenario where the desire for free shit is replaced by the desire to need to eat or drink or whatever, and we're going to see a lot more determined adversaries. Everyone having high-end expensive equipment cuts both ways after all. This is where we begin to see the beginning of modern prepared citizen stuff in the tactical sense. The night vision is incredibly useful here, as not only can you, do the shooty McTooty Rudy thing with it, but night vision allows you to navigate and move places under the cover of darkness. Be it linking up with friends, moving friends from one area to another, consolidating, perhaps egressing the area when you decide you can no longer hold a position. you name it, right? Quick Dawn armor is useful when other people have rifles. The ability to use a handgun at longer distances than 3 yards, similarly, incredibly useful here when you have a concealed weapon on body. How about a PDW? Sometimes you might want to show up in certain areas, but the existence of some governmental forces or just your neighbors that you don't know that well seeing you with a full-on rifle may paint you as the problem child of the area, even though you're just looking to defend yourself. The key here is the tasteful application of tactical Gucci gear. Not to prevent yourself from being called a LARPer, but without question, by definition of this scenario, services will return. And if you try to do or even look like you're doing hood rat shit with the boys as you turn the area into a personal Thunderdome, you're going to find real quick that your butthole is going to be turned into a local Thunderdome in federal prison 1 month down the line. Now, obviously, this type of scenario does not need to just be precipitated by a very spicy storm. It could be a number of things, like the temporary collapse of the power grid for a local area, lockdown of a very large area to a much more intense pandemic, you name it, right? It doesn't just have to be a hurricane, though it's very useful to use the hurricane because that's an actual real-world scenario that we saw in the United States. I also think it's worth admitting that in terms of intensity and likelihood, this kind of sits at an intersection of being fairly intense and requiring a good bit of capability to handle well, but also being something that could realistically happen in our lifetime. If you are not able to handle something like this, it might be a good reminder to kind of upgrade your preparedness strategy, plans, and skills, time and funds permitting, of course. But also for people like me that like to prepare for some more less likely but intense scenarios that, hey, don't get too sidetracked. It's important to make sure you have this part squared away first as well.
Damn, this is peak influencing, Brock.
I've never seen you influence so hard.
I'm influencing so hard. Look, it's even rotating. I just need to... Oh, fuck.
But we're only halfway up the chart, so what's next? Systemic degradation. Essentially, the system and all that enables it is beginning to permanently fail. The key here is not that the system itself is failing, which we noticed in all the other scenarios, but the underlying systems that allow, the individual components to function are also failing. The term degradation here is used to denote irreversible damage. So something like loss of monopoly on violence, collapse in legitimacy of rule, the ability to provide services for an extended period, loss of rule of law, or perhaps the carrying capacity of an infrastructure no longer can support the population that it used to. If you combine this with a disaster, you may find return to normalcy is very difficult or even impossible. In an earthquake, a Waffle House might cease operations because it's under 20 foot of rubble. But you remove the rubble, waffles are back in service, that is our disruption event. However, in systemic degradation scenarios, we have our emergency and we look to our Waffle House and find the rubble never got removed because no one is bothering to clean it up, or worse yet, the Waffle House is still standing, but no one wants to deliver the food because it's no longer worth it to do so. To say it's impossible to reverse systemic degradation, but it's not elastic in nature. It won't just spring back with existing systems in place. Underlying issues need to be solved first. Thus, you see a lot of nations that are in a degraded state enter sort of a death spiral. As one core pillar fails, it starts taking down other systems with it. And as the state begins to fail, rule of law, monopoly of violence, trust, and institution begin to fade, especially at the fringes of state control. A little at first, and then more as the system continues to have its failure cascade. It's hard to point out exactly what this might entail for us in our cozy first world nation, but it's certainly not pretty. And we've seen this play out to a limited degree in failed states, regions of third world nations, and very distinctly in intense wars or civil war. On the ground level, it's not nearly as sexy as your favorite apocalypse movie, especially if you're in the vicinity of areas that are still under state control, because a lot of the systems are still going to be in place, at least partially, and you probably still need to commute to work, build a life, and make things work. But there's still also a massive uptick in violence, lower quality of life, rolling blackouts, massive price spikes, and the occasional unavailability of food, and more, and your imagination's the limit. If we kind of look outside of the social concentrations like cities, you may find that rule of law, utility, government influence, and everything else begin to fade, or in some cases even outright vanish. If other nations are being used as anecdotes, other entities may be able to step into this power vacuum, drug cartels, gangs, or even a local militia. All likely seeking to recreate some level of rule of law and control, probably in their image. Almost always with extreme violence, for those that don't toe the line, pay the tithe, the tax, or in some cases, for those that are just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the wrong type of person in the wrong place at the wrong time. Preparing for these scenarios continue to build on what we have so far. The ability to operate off-grid for long periods of time, and the ability to defend yourself from those seeking to do you harm. Which of course is going to include a huge uptick in random violence, but now also may include targeted violence from organized groups. This is where we enter what many people in the industry are going to call LARP bullshit, as their preparedness stops at that regional disruption. Here you're going up against an organized force that will very likely outnumber you. So good training, tactical skills, team tactics, as well as very high-end enablers like night vision and potentially even thermal, drones, and more, alongside a healthy dose of luck to get a leg up against forces like this. Finally, the tip of the pyramid, something many point to as just shit hit the fan, but actually represents a very staggeringly unlikely scenario: the complete collapse of society. Despite what is parroted time and time again, society itself as a whole is actually fairly robust. Sure, large parts of it can collapse, but the actual complete secession of society at large scale is fairly rare. This part kind of needs its own video, because if we do somehow manage to pull it off to go to complete societal collapse, preparing for this scenario is wholly more complicated than anything we've seen before this, and is very much a Herculean task. Well, everything we've done before this point is about weathering the storm, metaphorically and literally. Preparing for shit hit the fan, the collapse of society, is a lot more about indefinite survival. And unlike everything beforehand, it's not just about survival. Humans can absolutely tough it out for the short term, but for the long term, which is what this is going to be, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, survival is not enough. You need to have more than that. You need to have a functional, comfortable life. And that is actually very hard to do. It requires a very specific set of skills, a shitload of supplies, and quite frankly, only functions in very specific parts of the United States. So despite the fact that a lot of people are preparing for this, there's nothing wrong with that, it requires its own video and is perhaps more nuanced than most people give it credit for. However, I think nowadays there's a lot more nuance in shit hit the fan and how intense or not intense it may be. Viewing preparedness as binary is doing a pretty big disservice to yourself. You may end up with some truly impressive capabilities if all you do is prepare for the top of the pyramid. You also end up with the dumbest looking food pyramid of all time. If all that you think about is the most extreme Mad Max-esque scenarios, a platoon on platoon gunfight, because that's all you practice for, you're going to end up like with the ADM, everything looks like a nail to a hammer. So too does the stereotypical prepared citizen, as they often try to apply end-of-time gears to much more mundane scenarios. I'm sure you heard phrases that kind of fall into this trap countless times. You need 12 mags minimum, nothing else even matters. Thermal is objectively better than night vision for all use cases. Why use 9mm when you can use 300 blackout? What is the point of soft body armor when hard body armor exists? Why do you need a concealable weapon? The list goes on, right? To be triply sure though, it's not to say you shouldn't prepare for that top rung, tip of the pyramid, end of times. It's the most fun after all, and healthy preparing isn't just a task, it's also a hobby. Just remember to devote some mental brain power and funds and time to the middle rungs and kind of fill out your pyramid to be a nice, healthy pyramid. I don't know. The analogy begins to fall apart. We don't even use the pyramid anymore. Now, I've intentionally left out some of the very specifics of each of the rungs of this pyramid, and that's what I want to cover next time in a video. I'm going to be probably, who knows, calling proportional response to preparedness scenarios, which, you know, if you've watched this video, you know roughly what I'm talking about. Picking the right tool to the right task, and the fact that overkill is probably not actually the correct solution in a lot of these scenarios. And unfortunately, it's kind of bred a mindset where more and more capability is being left by the wayside as more people try to get more and more advanced capability, while forgetting that a lot of this capability is actually relevant at lower intensity level events. Trust me, it needs its own video. We'll see you for that one. Speaking of videos, this one's at an end. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this, my little pyramid, I put way too much effort into that thing, made sense to you and kind of helped drive this point home. Regardless, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Look. She's so upset with us.
Yeah.
Look at her. Oh.